Good afternoon. I am Steve Swain, a professor of music here at Dartmouth College, and the director of the college's Montgomery Fellows Program. We gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Western Abenaki, who were and are part of the Wabanaki Confederation. The Montgomery Fellows Program brings exceptional people to an exceptional place. That exceptional place, of course, is Dartmouth College, but it also is the Montgomery House on Ockham Pond, which was purchased in 1977 through the generosity of Kenneth Montgomery, class of 1925, and his wife, Harl. Our fellow today, the college's 262nd resident fellow, comes to share with us his life and wisdom. This term, the Montgomery Fellows Program partnered with the directors of the workshops in the Hopkins Center to bring three outstanding artists who will be sharing their work and philosophy about creation. I should pause and say that when we go to the question and answer period, there's a microphone there and a microphone there. So when we have that, I would ask, because of the film, that you would take your way to the microphones. Over the past week and a half now, I have been witness to the insights, wit, and wisdom of our current fellow, who has been speaking to students and community members about his journey from Berkeley to Santa Fe, from comics to clay, and how he found out that he had an original voice. I've asked Jenny Swanson, director of the Hops Ceramic Workshop since 2004, to introduce our fellow. Please join me in welcoming Jenny.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks to Steve and Ellen and everyone who made this residency possible for Diego. Diego Romero has been working in ceramics for more than 3 decades. He also makes prints from carved blocks, and he has loved comic books since he was a child. As a teenager, he studied traditional pottery with a Hopi mentor, and then went on to study at Otis Parsons in LA. He received his MFA from UCLA. Diego was a USA Fellow in 2015, and his work is in many private and public collections, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the British Museum, the Denver Art Museum, and the New Mexico Museum of Art, and the Hood Museum. Diego is a member of the Cochiti Pueblo tribe and comes from an artist family, some of whom have attended Dartmouth. He is a full-time studio artist. He lives in Santa Fe with his wife, the artist Cartier Romero, and their family. I hope that you can see Diego's work in person at our Baker Library exhibit, where we have 2 works on loan. And also, if you can see his work at the Hood Museum in the exhibit Unbroken, that is currently up on the 1st floor. And it was curated by recent student interns at the Hood, and it also has some video footage that was filmed in our studio a few years ago when I met Diego. Jamie Powell from the Hood introduced me to Diego, and I'm so grateful that we were able to have him come back for this residency. Diego prompts us to reflect upon tough issues, but his portrayal of hard, painful things is elegant, sincere, and empathetic. He is brilliant in reminding us to look carefully at ancient ceramics, which have so much to teach us, and bringing that into the contemporary. He has his own take on what is traditional and what is contemporary. Diego is a unique ceramic artist and storyteller, and it's been a great honor to have him here working in our studio during the past week. So please welcome Diego Romero.
Thank you for having me. This has been a marvelous experience. Thank you, Jenny, Steve, John, all you people, Sarah. You've all been so good to me. So I'm going to start at the very beginning of this journey, a journey which started 38 years ago at a place called the Institute of American Indian Arts. And I had the privilege to study under this lady, Atala Iloloma. She was a traditional Hopi woman and a traditional potter. And her and I had a certain simpatico, and she very much became the grandmother figure in my life. I had never really been close to my biological grandmother, but this woman stepped in at a point in my life where I was still very impressionable, like the clay itself, and helped to mold and shape my future for me. Loloma took me lovingly by the hand and showed me the craft that would one day be my life's pursuit. She showed me how to dig clay, how to look in the arroyo, how to fine paint, how to mix temper, what slips made what paints, what vegetables made what dyes, what temper to use, and finally how to fire outside in a outdoor firing, a pit, so to speak, a pit fire. And Loloma was always, I think really honestly, she was the first person in my life that truly believed in me. And she would tell me, you know, you have a real talent at this. If you just stick with me and learn what I have to teach you and stay away from the drugs and the alcohol, you'll go far at this. And I listened to her and I learned my lessons, and I did well in school for the first time in my life. And I graduated IAIA with a good grade point average, and I got a scholarship to Otis Parsons School of Design. It was here I met Ralph Becerra. And Ralph, again, was a master of his craft, and we had a certain simpatico, he and I. We instantly bonded, and Ralph was all about the surface treatment, the technical aspects of it, how to China paint, how to gold luster, how to throw on the wheel. And me and Ralph really, again, we had a really good relationship, and we were really close, he and I. And I remember upon my senior year, Ralph telling me, you know, you really need to think about where you want to go to grad school. And I remember telling Ralph, well, you know, I've been looking at UCLA. I really want to study with this guy, Adrian Sachs. Adrian at the time was on all the magazine covers. He was on all the posters, all the articles. Adrian was like the man, so to speak, in ceramics. And I was telling Ralph, I love his work. It's high craft, it's elegant, it just speaks to me. And I've taken this long shot and I've applied to UCLA in the hopes that I can study with Adrian. And I remember Ralph just kind of shaking his head saying, Diego, you might find you don't get along very well with Adrian. But nonetheless, I wound up at UCLA, and true to his word, Ralph was right. For the first time, I did not hit it off with Adrian. It was a very contentious relationship in the beginning. Me and Adrian are good friends now, and I really do owe it and credit him for pushing me in the direction which would later set me apart from the other Pueblo potters in Santa Fe and make the work unique. But in the beginning, it was a struggle. I remember Adrian telling me, we don't make pots here at UCLA, we make art. And I was like, what's that supposed to mean? And Adrian was like, you figure it out. You have 3 years, and you figure it out. And I really don't truly know if I ever figured it out, But what I did figure out was that if I could give someone a picture, they could give me 1,000 words. And I looked to narrative, and I looked to the Greeks. I had always been fascinated by this childhood, well, not a childhood book, but a book that had fascinated me as a child called the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I looked to the Mimbres pottery of the Southwest. I was always aware that there had been this culture in the Southwest, and they had done these kind of illustrative, kind of funky bowls, right, with these little pictographs of people in ceremony, farming, hunting, living life, going throughout their daily affairs. And I kind of combined these aspects, and I came up with my own kind of contemporary interpretation of a Mimbres bowl. The first one I did was hero twins with AK-47, and I showed this piece to Adrian, and Adrian told me, you give me 12 of those, and I'll give you a piece of paper that says Master of Fine Arts, UCLA. So I ended up giving Adrian 6, and but it was enough. So I embarked on this kind of endeavor of doing these kind of neoclassic Mimbres bowls, and instead of drawing directly from the Mimbres and copying them, I was using the narrative paradigm of the Mimbres to depict them in these kind of quirky situations, like playing golf, right? Cochiti has a golf course, so most Cochiti males play golf. Originally, and looking at other aspects of combining Pueblo shapes with pop culture and a pop narrative, with the Greek, going back to the Greek stylized, almost superhero type bodies of the athletes and the runners of these Greek vases that had captivated me and just kind of spurred my imagination as a child. Originally, the narrative was very autobiographical. This is an incident where I met my grandfather for the first time. And I really only met the man once in my life, and he spoke Indian. So we really couldn't communicate, but I remember he sang me a song, and my father later explained to me that it was a song, and in the Pueblo way, a song is also a prayer. So he had sang me this song, and in this prayer, he was explaining to me that the rain comes and brings moisture to the earth, and that the crops and the corn and the beans and the squash grow and the people prosper. And this is the natural order of life. And it was very beautiful. And it's my one memory of my grandfather in his house by his adobe fireplace. And he has his drum up there in the, yeah, this works perfect, and his little pot in the nicho. And I thought it would be interesting to put the rain cloud in instead of as a dialogue symbol, to put a symbol for the rain cloud in. I've put the CNN and the Gulf War in the background, and though this took place at totally separate incidents and places in time, as an artist, you're allowed to play and shuffle the timeline around and pretty much do as an artist does and take liberty with the situation. This piece is titled Reclining Dinosaur. This is a factory outside of Bernalillo, and I often find the landscape, or manscape as I like to call them, very reflective of where we are as people, our time and place, and where we are on the in this cosmology or our place and time on the planet. Interestingly enough, this factory now has solar panels all through the front of it. This is an older piece. This piece is over 20 years old. These are the knot bearers that carried the corded string that led to the Pueblo Revolt. And they carried this corded yucca rope that has these knots on it, and they were to be untied one each day. Upon the cord being totally bare of knots, all the Pueblo peoples were to rise and have a revolt against the Spanish colonizers and the church, who had been so oppressive to them up till now. So these two guys ran from village to village, all 19 pueblos, and all the way into Arizona, where the Hopis are to this day. And the cords were untied, the knots were untied, the cords laid bare, and the Pueblo people did, in fact, have an uprising. And I believe that it's actually the only successful indigenous uprising in the history of North America. This is Saint Sebastian. This piece is titled Hector at the Ships. During this revolt, the Pueblo Indians burned the churches on the Rio Grande. So people would ask me, well, where did you ever come up with a title like that? And I would say, well, it's like Hector at the ships in Troy. He chases the Greeks down and burns their boats. And of course, the irony being that the Greeks later sacked Troy. And here again, the irony being that the Spanish returned and colonized the New Mexico territory. All pieces begin with a drawing. And I like to draw. I try to do a little bit every day. And my favorites of the drawings eventually make it into a pot. The pots will vary slightly, sometimes more than others. Sometimes the pots will vary greatly from the actual drawing. But that is how they originate. They start as drawings, and I'll cut them out with stencils, place them in the bowl, and recomposition it to fit in the concave surface. This was at Acoma Pueblo during the Pueblo Revolt. After the village was laid siege to, the left foot of every male was chopped off, and the women were sold into slavery. This is a battle scene, again, kind of a heroic interpretation of the Pueblo warrior standing off against his counterpart, the conquistador, with the burning church in the background. And we got a little kind of cannon here blasting, kind of showing the lopsidedness of the conflict. The Spaniards, of course, had guns and armor. I often like to do my conquistadors as in the plate mail and the chain mail, more as knights. And this goes back to my child again, and the fascination with Lancelot and King Arthur and the Arthurian mythos and the knight. But it's not untrue. The original group of conquistadors that came and colonized the Southwest did, in fact, wear plate and chainmail. This piece is titled Shiwana's Dream. And Shiwana is a medicine man, spiritual leader, shaman, whatever you want to call him, but he's having this vision or this dream of the coming of Christianity. And he doesn't quite know what it is, but he knows it's very foreboding. We have, the conquistador and plate mail and the Pueblo warrior opposing each other, with this man on a wooden cross coming to him in his vision. And we've used a little touch of Basquiat there with the crown atop. This is a picture of my father. My father was a U.S. Marine, and we were always raised with a deep reverence for the Marine Corps. While I would not call my dad a patriot, I would say my dad was a Marine. He lost his hand at the Chosin Reservoir. He was both in World War II in the Pacific Theater as well as Korea. But mostly it was Korea that we were aware about. We were, as I had said, we were always raised, my brother and I, with a deep reverence for the Marine Corps in the family. Father knew this man, Ira Hayes, and talked about him often. He was elevated to an almost heroic superhero type status in the house. Ira Hayes raised the flag on Mount Suribachi and died a tragic death. He drowned in a small puddle of water in the middle of desert. He went on to become an alcoholic. My son was also a Marine and was in Iraq. This piece is titled Guernica, and I was working in a studio, and I was taken aback early on after 9/11 with this picture of an Iraqi man removing his dead infant son from the rubble. Ironically enough, the book was open to the page of Guernica on the table. So it just seemed like it was supposed to happen. So we have the wailing mother, infant child beneath a hail of rockets cascading above her. These rockets originate out of the dust clouds of the 9/11 tragedy adjacent the other side of the pot. I watched this event unfold on CNN, as probably all of us did, and one of the most haunting images that was seared into my brain was the people leaping from the burning buildings while they were on fire. So here we have the origins of the rocket trails, which carry on over through the other pot as the towers collapse. This is me at the White House. This journey has taken me many places, and I happened to wind up in the White House on this particular occasion with a group of other Indian artists. And I guess really the thing that I took from it was the White House was much smaller than I ever imagined it to be. This is me contemplating a relationship that had somehow skewed, and I found myself doing a lot of this in my early years. This was a portrait of a person that I was in a relationship with, this relationship had gone awry. And this piece was titled Circe, not because I held her in any malice or viewed her in any as an evil person in any way. Circe is the witch in the Iliad that turns Odysseus and his men to wild boars. But I truly felt that at the end of this relationship, I had been changed and transformed into this ugly, hideous, wild pig. And I just really left feeling really bad about myself, in this horrible aftermath of this very tumultuous relationship. This piece was titled Girl Waiting, and I did not have a phone. I do not have a phone to this day. My wife affords me this privilege, but this used to always drive whoever I was in a relationship at the time. It was very upsetting that there was no way to get a hold of me other than to wait for my call. So this is where this came out of. This piece was titled Girl Waiting. I was in this relationship with another artist, and this one had lasted for longer than most. And I remember she was always asking me, when are you going to marry me? 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 And finally, I, out of like a desperate act, I proposed. But it was too little, too late. It was a empty gesture at this point. And she decided to go her separate way. This woman actually, as I mentioned, was an artist and has work upstairs in the Hood Museum. Her name was Roxanne Swensel, and her name is Roxanne Swensel, and she's showing right now in the museum upstairs. I thought it would be very interesting to do her more as her stylized figure than an actual portrait of her, and me, of course, as my alter ego in the background. This was the day Roxanne walked out of my life. I remember it very clearly. I lived in this little kind of pagoda-type studio down on 2nd Street, and there was a cloudy storm on the horizon, and I remember trembling with rage. I was so angry, and I was truly brokenhearted, but my pride would not allow me to pursue her. So I let her walk out of my life that day. I found myself in the bars. This had become the primary reason I believe that this relationship had failed. By this time in my life, my drinking had truly taken control of my life. And though I don't know if I consciously realized it, maybe on subconscious level I did. This pot was also done during this period, and as I mentioned, that while I probably couldn't admit it, I subconsciously, or I knew that I had been in the grasp of this terrible beast of alcohol and was unable to escape. Still wanting to believe in love, I did a portrait of Paris and Helen. I was never a Romeo and Juliet fan, but Paris and Helen appealed to me very much, and I still wanted to believe that there was love out there somewhere. And so I did this portrait of Paris and Helen. Every once in a while, I'll get a commission and I'll do an erotic piece. Mostly these are on request and on commission, but I like to approach it with a light heart, and I never really take it too serious. But like I said, every now and then there'll be a certain particular individual that will make a request and say, "Can you do me something humorous and erotic?" And I'm always very happy to oblige. I was married and I was in a HIV positive relationship. So this became the mantra. We were very much, we practiced safe sex. This was a piece that I did for a show with James Kelly, and the theme for the show was Wonder Woman. And I would do going back to my childhood and my love of comic books, I would approach this show as that I personally knew Wonder Woman. She was my friend, and I would convince her to do a series of sittings for me in which I would do her portrait, ultimately culminating in a nude that I would somehow talk her into posing nude with her tiara and her bracelets in her temple. So, of course, Wonder Woman being my favorite, I did want it to be in any way vulgar, so I thought it was very tasteful, my favorite heroine, athletic and lean, but all done tastefully, in good taste, and good humor. I'm speaking of her like she's a real person. This is Michael Black Elk. Michael Black Elk came with the marriage. He was Elisa's adopted son, and he was abandoned in a park in Albuquerque. This is Michael again. One time he was late in the studio. We used to live in this giant warehouse, and Michael used to love his video games, and I remember seeing him out there playing this video game one night, silhouetted by the TV, illuminated by the TV screen on these pile of milk crates, and it just seemed like a really cool image of Michael. This piece is titled An Eye for an Eye, and it was done shortly after the murder of my stepdaughter, Shelley Black Elk. Shelley was murdered brutally by her baby's father. She was stabbed to death 11 times. And I was so angry, and I wanted to see this man put to death for it. And I remember one night back in Berkeley, I was having dinner with my childhood friends, and they were saying, Diego, we're from Berkeley, you're from Berkeley. We don't support the death penalty. You don't support the death penalty. And my friend said, Diego, an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. And my response to Eddie was, so be it. If I have to be a raging blind man, I will be a raging blind man. This piece is titled Raging Blind Man. This, of course, I always felt that this led to a divorce, the murder of our Shelley girl. And these are the people that held me up and supported me during this period of my life. After wallowing in self-pity for about a year, and I woke up one morning and I realized I was free. I was once again back to my old self and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. This piece is titled Fallen Angel. Still, again, I was battling with my alcoholism. At this point, I had been sober for 7 years of my life, but during the divorce, like a fish to water, like a homing pigeon, I found myself once again, trapped in the throes of my self-pity and alcohol abuse. These pieces are all kind of a response to our consumer society and our throwaway society, and how we, as this society, create all this landfill. And I guess the concept behind this was that it had been in a post-apocalyptic situation, that the little people of mythology and the giants had returned and were collecting our debris of civilization and stacking them into these giant mounds. This is an ant's eye view from the golf course at Cochiti, and I always, people often do the bird's eye view, but I always find myself the ant's eye view very intriguing. So this would be if you were the ant on the golf course at night at Cochiti and you found this giant golf ball on your doorstep. Again, with the consumerism and the deforesting of the Amazon, and it takes a conspicuous amount of water and grain to grow one hamburger. So this was all about excess. And of course, I was surviving off hamburgers at this time, the 99-cent burger. This piece was titled American Dream. And I remember just trying to keep gas in my gas tank and pay my rent. And I was literally surviving off 99-cent hamburgers when my friend told me, he said, "Things could be worse, Diego. You could be living in Iraq." You're right. So this piece, American Dream, kind of came out of that moment. This is titled Day of the Earth Pigs. And I was in my friend's studio one day looking out. My friend had a studio down by the highway, and I was looking out his window, and I literally saw about 20 SUVs roaring up and down the highway. And I kind of came up with this idea of the earth pig. Many times I'll examine a pot and do several images relating to the original concept. This was a abandoned automobile outside in the arroyo of the house me and my kids lived in. My kids would always come out and stay the summers with me, and we would dance Cochiti Feast and do the Santa Fe Indian Market. But they would play, one summer they played all summer on this abandoned automobile. It was this rusted out shell of a VW. And I remember when the oldest boy left to go back to his mom, he sold it to my daughter, and we drew up a pink slip. Santa Fe landscape. This kind of demonstrates the triculturalism of Santa Fe. This was a manscape from across the river of my studio at that time. There was a teepee and this kind of bus full of hippies, and anyway, it was just very tricultural image. This is one of the newer, later manscapes revisited. So we have the abandoned cars and the trailer houses with the burn can and the two guys out with the little reservation dog, and we have the factory in the background, which leads to this term of environmental racism, which I learned this from my wife, who is also very involved with a group called Pioneers and is an environmental activist. So we'll examine this term further down in the presentation. This is Cochiti Feast, I mentioned earlier. This is a dance we as the Cochitis do every summer. We haven't done it since the pandemic, but we used to do it every summer, you would say religiously. And this is a view of the line, the dance from within inside the line. And one way I was able to reconnect with my people was through dance. I remember joining this group and becoming a traditional dancer, I would say. And I raised my kids much more than I was ever raised. My kids were raised doing this dance and dancing with this group. And it became just a really important part of our lives. So this dance is done every July 14th on the plaza at Cochiti, and there's always spectators. There's the people that stand on the roofs, and we have the teenage youth. They're kind of represented by their NFL jersey and his Punisher t-shirt. And this, like I said, this dance takes place every July 14th on the Pueblo at Cochiti. This was a break in the dance where we as the dancers were all in the shade of an awning. We switched sides with the other group or the other clan in the village, the turquoise and the pumpkin. We'll come out and dance one round, and then we go back and stand in the shade while they come out and dance the other. And then we switch back and forth all day like this. When you enter the village of Cochiti, you will see a sign that says, positively no sketching, picture taking, or recording. So this young lady pulled her iPhone out of her belt during the pause in the dance and snapped this selfie off, which brought this interesting question is, do the rules apply to the people within the culture, or do they just apply to the people outside of the culture? I've had this discussion with other Pueblo Indians many times since. They'll ask me about this pot and what was going on. And usually the consensus is that the rules do apply to everybody. I fell in love and met the most marvelous person in my life. I am now married to her, Cara Romero. And me and Cara are very much in love and happily married. I am so lucky to have met Cara. She's my better half. And I think this kind of illustrates that. So she's saying, the girl in the background is saying, great corn mother, Povey still doesn't realize she's marrying a monster. And this was done shortly after, I would say, me and Cara's first real fight, where I truly showed myself and revealed that I was probably not the person she had thought I was all along. And things were said, and there's always with that partner or that significant other, you'll have that fight that there's really no taking it back. Things are said, and the line is crossed, and either you go on and forgive each other, or you can't. But me and Cara were very lucky to move on and have a beautiful son named Paris, which I named after the Prince of Troy, Paris. So this is your namesake bowl, Paris. This piece is titled Narcissist, and I remember having people would say, Diego, you're such a narcissist. Diego, you're such a narcissist. And many times I'll work through issues or things in my life through the pottery. So I decided to examine this situation, and after working through it through the pottery, I decided that while I truly did have narcissistic tendencies, I was not in fact a narcissist. But I always thought it was clever the way he's staring into it is presented upside down, but it's really not upside down. This is right side up. And if you do ever stand by a pond or a stream, your feet will be cut off. So this is actually the kind of view of his feet as he gazes upon his own image in the stream. So appealing to my narcissistic tendencies, I thought it was so clever. I do these prints now. So at this point, it had really, in some way, come full circle. Many people by now the work had been out there for a while, and people would contact me and say, you know what, we really love your pottery. Would you be interested in coming to our studio and making an edition of prints with us? So years later, after doing the pottery for like 20 years, I found myself back in the studio printing again, doing paper editions, working with other printers, and becoming, again, an illustrator. Now I do skateboard decks. Recently I did an automobile. So it has been this kind of interesting journey that pottery, while I took a left turn in Albuquerque and became a potter, it led me back to the original ambition of being an illustrator and I guess a designer of sorts. This piece was titled Apocalypto. This piece is titled, "Don't Shoot, Diego. They're enemies of the church," and this is war, translated from Spanish as it would be. This piece was titled Pueb Fiction. One of my favorite formulas is, I call it pop appropriation pueblification. And I'll take a really current, popular pop culture, image of pop culture, and I'll Indianize it, so to speak, or give it a Pueblo Indian twist to it. So we have our old pal Uma here, but she's dressed as a traditional Pueblo woman during the feast day lunch break, reading her book, Cochiti. This is titled Kara, my old pal Wonder Woman again, but I always wanted Kara to pose for this for me. She was such a good sport. And this is Kara. She goes to the gym and takes care of herself and watches what she eats, and and she has just a perfect roundy face that translates real well into a 2D quality so I kind of approached this with a little bit of Vargas Girl, and one of the things I liked about it so much is that truly she's very muscular and very powerful, but she's also very feminine, like Kara. So with that, I was really pleased with this edition, and I titled it after my wife, Kara. This piece is titled In the Beginning. And in the beginning, the Creator, He created the universe. He made all the stars and all the planets, all the night sky, and He populated the universe with all sorts of great, wonderful animals, and He gave them all a great tail. But He gave man the greatest tail of all. And the other animals in the universe were jealous, and they went to the Creator and they said, Creator, we have this problem with this man. He has no humility. He has no regard for the rest of us. He waves his tail about and he sashays through the plaza, and he's always showing off his tail and making the rest of us jealous. And the Creator said, I've been watching this man. And you're right. We got a real problem with him. This guy, he doesn't have any humility. But this is what we'll do. He said, we will have a great fiesta or a party. We'll have a big party, and when he gets drunk and we all pass out, we'll come to him in the middle of the night and we'll clip his tail and we'll take his tail from him. So this went as planned. They all had this great party, and they got rip-roaring drunk, and they all passed out, and in the middle of the night, they clipped a man's tail, and they took it from him. But the next morning, when they all awoke, this actually had the exact opposite effect of what they had planned, because without a tail, man knew that he was truly unique and understood that he alone of all the creatures in the universe was divine and had no tail. So I would do these whole series of stories, and I would combine creationism with Darwinism. And people assumed, because I was Native American, that these were actually Cochiti mythos, so to speak. But they really weren't. I was just having fun with creating my own contemporary mythology at the time. And I was just kind of running through, in general, just taking stuff from Easter Island and putting it out in the desert. Just having a good time with it, investigating the abduction incidents in Roswell. We have this kind of whole contemporary mythology in New Mexico about the landing site and the crash site and the aliens and cow abductions and all this kind of, I want to say, like I said, a contemporary mythology about outer space and who's in these saucers? The Mayonauts. Right, and I was taken with this movie as a little kid called Chariots of the Gods. I remember I saw it at the UC Berkeley Theater, and as a youngster, and I remember walking out of the movie theater thinking, wow, man, these Mayans, they took off to outer space, and they're going to come back in 2012, and I'm going to be on the roof of my house with a pair of binoculars. And it never happened. But still the die was cast, and this had taken root in my imagination that somehow these Mayans who had ascended to the heavens would someday return to Earth and claim their rightful place amongst the pyramids and Teotihuacan and Chianaco and all these fascinating ruins. Here we have Coyote, and he's ascending from the heavens. He's bringing fire to man. Much as Prometheus does, Coyote steals fire from the fire gods and brings fire to man, who I always saw this as kind of an allegory for enlightenment, right? That he brings the age of enlightenment to the people. I threw the cell phones in there just as kind of afterthought. I found humor in it, and it was kind of combining the contemporary with the mythological in this kind of playful way of a contemporary mythological event. Our old pal, the Ninja Turtles. This is Thus Spoke Popeye. Popeye led the Pueblo Revolt. And he was the chief that halted the church and the colonizing conquistadors, and led the really as I had stated earlier before, the first successful, maybe not the first, but probably, as they've mentioned, maybe the only long-standing successful revolt against the colonizing of the Southwest. This piece is titled Santiago. It's my son's namesake pot. I have a son, Santiago. He was a student here. I was about to say not too long ago, but it was actually quite a while ago. So, Santiago is the character that El Cid is based on, and he's the patron saint of warriors. He's very popular in the Southwest. A lot of retablo carvers, a lot of paintings in the churches, all about Santiago. And there's almost I want to say there's almost a cult of Santiago prevalent in the Southwest. And he rides a black horse, and he protects the pilgrims on their journey to Mecca, but he also, when he's not busily trampling Moors and Muslims, he's trampling Indians and other pagans. So I always found this interesting that we kind of, as Pueblo Indians, adopted these names for our children and ourselves, that we use these names. This piece was done shortly after the canonization of a particular priest. His name was Junipero Sierra, and he was recently canonized. This caused quite a stir with the native population. He had been very brutal to the Indians of the Southwest. And this print, there's a print that goes more in depth to this. It's upstairs on display now. And originally, the print is the original drawing from which the pot came from, I work in that order. But interestingly enough, this print actually wound up in Boston at the Theological Institute at the 7th Station of the Cross, where the priests felt that this was an interpretation of an Indian Jesus, and that they used this to educate the priests about when you go out and proselytize, you can't beat and whip people in the process of so doing. During the Pueblo Revolt, the priests were killed. Many were hurled from the mesa tops. This is a piece I did for the IAI Museum, and they were kind of, at this point, I'll often have a conversation with the museum, and they'll tell me, give me an idea, like, can you do us something like this? And I was like, we want something historical. We want, I remember they looked at this piece and said, is it Popeye? And I said, sure. I did this piece in collaboration with another potter named Jody Falwell. Jody was, or is, in my opinion, the matriarch of contemporary Pueblo pottery. I first came across her work at the Southwest Museum on a field trip while I was at UCLA, and Jody opened my eyes to the possibilities of what could be done if we just simply adapt the word contemporary and go with that as opposed to the word traditional. Many times I think that people view tradition and culture as these stagnant things when really they are constantly in flux. And what is traditional today was once very contemporary for its time, and what is contemporary today is will one day be tomorrow's tradition. Also, I wanted to mention Kara pitched in on this piece, and these were several of these images were taken from Kara's photographs, one of which, this portrait of Cricket, our daughter, was specifically done for this piece. I asked Kara, can you get a picture of Cricket in her point shoes? This other one on the right is the Ka portrait from upstairs. So I really see this as a three-way collaborative piece. Fascinatingly enough, one of the things I love so much about the piece is that the other collaborators, Kara and Jody, are women. So this piece was very more about the sensitivity and not violent and not a brutal scene of someone being murdered or conflict, but rather the emergence of a young girl through her journey as starting in the Pueblo as a little girl, dancing corn dance and growing into an adult and becoming a ballerina. This piece was titled Girl in the Anthropocene, and this is really, again, the environmental racism was the issue. And at this point, I talk a lot with my wife about these things. We dialogue constantly, and we have the girl here and her mother, and they're going through the mundane of everyday life, but they do so in the shadow of big industry. And the term originates in, regretfully, that if you are from a poor community that has no legal representation, ultimately big industry will build their factories and dump their waste on you and in your backyard. So this, of course, affects this. She's very clearly pregnant, and this affects your children and your unborn children. Again, just a continuation of the Anthropocene. This was taken outside of I-10, and I remember me and Kara were just kind of driving back from her reservation back to Santa Fe, and we passed this wind field of windmills, and this electric car came buzzing by. And I just got to be some optimism in it too, right? It can't all just be these foreboding views. So this piece was titled A Bright New Day. This is Last Boy, and this is Museum Hill. This piece was actually done as a commission from this museum right here. There's a Museum Hill in Santa Fe. It sits atop the rest of the city, and there's this huge giant statue, much like the Statue of Liberty in the other one. And here we have the last boy. Chungo is his name, my kind of alias, and he's paddling on by while the rest of Santa Fe is submerged and underwater. He's paddling by this giant water. The water level has obviously significantly risen for it to be this high, but it's supposed to be post-apocalyptic type. All these images kind of came from the movie Planet of the Apes, right? There's that final scene where Charlton Heston's riding down the sea line and he comes across the Statue of Liberty. So that's where the apocalypto came from, and this came from the apocalypto. This piece is titled American Diastrophism. And this was a commission from the museum in Bristol. And I remember they asked me at this point, they said, do something political. So it's a pretty open-ended request. But I said, how about this? There's a lot. I remember at the time, there was the Flint, Michigan, Ferguson, and the No DAPL pipeline going through Pine Ridge. And there was always some Antifa on the CNN. There was some conflict between Antifa and the police going on. And so I went back to my childhood. And in my childhood, they used to staple these little flyers on the telephone poles in Berkeley, up and down Telegraph Avenue. And as a kid, I actually saw an image very similar to this. I drew from my memory, and it said, "Protest in the park, Saturday." The park being People's Park. And this image somehow, as a little boy, I can't remember exactly my age. I was fairly young, maybe 5 or 6 years old. It just really resonated in me and stuck out in my head forever, this image of the police and the protester. So I drew from that childhood memory, and I kind of updated it. Like I said, this guy's wearing the black hoodie, which is associated with Antifa, and he's got his little cell phone, and he's video recording the police line coming at him. This piece is titled Theater of War, and this again was a commission from the LA Museum, LACMA, and again, they were like, make us something political. So that's actually a lot of what I do now is I'm usually run about a year behind, and I'm always trying to pick up these, catch up with these museums. But ironically enough, the night before I had the discussion with them, I had been watching Dr. Strangelove, and this image of him falling out on the nuclear bomb just kind of seemed to appropriately fit on, you know, at the time, Trump and Kim Jong were going back and forth every day in the news. So it's about a current event and the absurdity of human nature, so to speak. Blow us all up, I guess. This was, I was doing in the studio late one night. Usually, it's not uncommon. I'll be in there 2, 3 in the morning working away, and I was watching Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he was talking about the wormhole and how there was these amazing things in the universe called wormholes, and you would pop through one and wind up in a totally different time or space in the universe, and that you could travel through these wormholes and you would wind up on the other end of the universe, possibly in another time, possibly as another self, and it just all seemed to click in my head that, oh, that's what I'll use. I'll do these crazy images of Chungo going through the wormhole. This piece was the latest piece I did. This piece is titled Mayonauts. It's the most current piece I've done. And again, I'm revisiting the Mayans and this concept of native futurism. So with that in mind, I want to thank you all for coming. I hope this was equally as great for you as it was for me. So thank you.
So as I've said, people, if you have a question, if you'd come to one of the microphones on either side. Diego, I'd like to start, if I might. Could you talk about the fact that many of your ceramics, in the ground part, we either see a skull or a pot or both, a skeleton. Just tell me more about what that means.
I would say that has to do with our connection to our past. Again, it's kind of like the mile marker in time of the Indian remains in the ground, the connection we have with the past and the present. And, you know, as you had mentioned at the beginning of the evening, you know, we're standing right now on Indian land. And oftentimes we don't realize this, or we overlook this whole idea of that this is Indian land, this was once sacred land, that there were actually, in fact, people that lived here and went and loved and lived and buried their dead, and were on this very land that we stand on right now tonight. So that's kind of a reminder or a homage to the people, the native people that were once here before us.
Hi, Diego. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about the motif on the perimeter of your pieces. It never closes. There's always an opening from the inside to the outside, a little pathway. I was wondering if you could tell me what that represents.
That, my friend, is called a line break. And I did not invent that. That is actually part of the historic paradigm going all the way back to, you'll see that in pottery from Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde. It becomes very much a part of Pueblo pottery, and the history of it is it's a spirit trail. So that as an artist, I think we invest so much of ourself and into the piece, and that is a way to ensure that my spirit is no longer connected to the pot. That upon finishing the pot has its own self and identity, and me and the pot are no longer bound to each other. And it goes on its journey, and I go on my journey, and we're no longer one.
Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to ask you a question. I'm a art teacher at a local high school, and we look at your work as part of class when we investigate how artists get inspiration for their work. And my 8th graders recently were really interested in how your pots are 3-dimensional, but your illustrations are really flat and 2-dimensional, and they couldn't wrap their head around that. And so, first of all, they'd freak if they knew I was asking you this in person. But can you just talk about how you're able to achieve that effect a little bit?
Yeah, I'm flattered that you use it to educate your students, the work. And how I do that is, as I stated earlier, I draw the images out on paper, and then I go down to Kinko's and I Xerox them, and then I take a razor blade and I make paper cuts. And I'll take the paper cut and I'll place it inside the shallow of the bowl, and I'll use a soft lead pencil and I'll trace around it. And essentially I'm using stencils. So and with that in mind, there is a little magic or a little wizardry that comes in putting the flat image on the round surface. But I've been doing it quite a while, and I'm pretty familiar with how to do it and the tricks. One primarily being is that oftentimes, one thing I realized early on when I was doing this is that it has to look straight, but it actually isn't. So lots of times those things are really wildly out of proportion and disproportionate, and because of the shape of the bowl or the vessel, or that even though they're really not on the same plane or even anywhere near the same composition as the drawings, as long as they look that way when the time they're on this 3D surface. So lots of times there's a little bit of shuffling around, a little bit of moving, and a little bit of, well, it's not straight, but it looks straight.
Of a question. Oh, are we on? We saw a lot of the insides of the bowl forms, and I was curious what's on the outside of a lot of those bowls.
Most of the bowls are just painted on the surface. There was a period where I actually would put some designs on the outsides, but it really it wasn't cost efficient. People never really looked at the outside. The bowls are always displayed in the museum from the front view. So it really stopped making sense to paint the outsides. So the outsides are burnished with a stone and have a nice kind of polish to it, which is very integral element to Pueblo pottery is the stone polish and the high burnish. So it's just burnished on the back in most cases. The pots, however, are painted in 3D, and it's kind of a different deal when painting a pot. Is that you are treating it as usually the bowls are a singular narrative of like a one picture cartoon, so to speak. But on the pots, it has to be a flowing narrative and have a front and a middle and a back, so to speak, a beginning and an end to it, or in some way continual narration that circles the pot. Oftentimes, unfortunately, many times I'll go in and see the pot, and my favorite side will be like turned to the wall, or there's many times I'll see someone will have the pot, and my favorite image on the pot will be facing the back of the nicho that it's in, but that is part of the deal with the pots is that many times they're only viewed from one side.
You mentioned your mentor who said that you were making art, not pots. And I was wondering if you could speak to, with pottery, the relationship between its utility and its artistry.
Well, as I mentioned, I would never be so, I guess, have so much hubris as to think that I figured out what art was and what it wasn't. But I did figure out for what I worked with, narrative seemed to be the ticket in. So it is an interesting idea because you got to understand we're all coming from this as a Western culture, and that while we have this particular concept of art, pottery is not considered a high art in the museum world and in Western culture. We are trying to change that, but it's an uphill battle. And for me, the quickest way was to give academia an image that they could produce 1,000 words over. But in other cultures, ceramics is viewed as a high art, and it does not have to have any narrative other than it's a functional piece and you can pour tea out of it. So you're really coming at this from our cultural bias, so to speak, which is understandable. I mean, there's that's who we are, and we're taught pretty early on jewelry, pottery, glass blowing. These things are not fine art. Painting, sculpture, these things are. So I guess like I said, that's one of the things I'm trying to change in the work, that what we view and as art, and why does some things have to be functional and some things not. Really, for me, none of it has to be functional, to be honest. I just, and also for me, none of it has to really be narrative. I can get, for me, art is something that moves you or makes you think, or that you react to. It can be a good reaction. It can be a bad reaction. Many times, me and Kara will go to a museum, and there'll be something, and I'll be laying in my bed at night, and I'll tell Kara, that was really disturbing, what we saw in the museum today. And then I realize, well, it was supposed to be. If I'm home talking about it, and 8 hours later I can't get it out of my head, maybe that's art. So really, these things, you really kind of gotta. I almost have to say, you really have to answer those questions for yourself. What moves you? What is art to you? You know, why for some people it can be a teapot or a ice cream bowl or a bracelet, and for other people it can only be a print or a painting or a sculpture.
Well, I think we would all dare say, Diego, that based on what we've been seeing today, we have a lot of things that we'll be talking about for the next few hours, and I think
Right.
that you, as Jenny said in her introduction, that you have elevated pottery to another level, and we thank you for sharing all that with us today. Won't you join me in thanking Diego?